All right, let's kind of switch reels a little bit. So a reason that I made this podcast is because I am very disheartened about the direction that America is going, and I think that American democracy is at a tipping point, and I'm not optimistic about it. So my question to you guys is how important is it that we really determine if God is real or not? For example, in dealing with these problems that we do have in America, is the solution more likely to come from a religious perspective, or is the solution more likely to become from a secular perspective? Why don't you take it away, Sam?
Yeah, so I remember when you gave that question. Obviously, your worldview um, is it's going to really how you see the world, right? So it's these assumptions and the assertions that you have through which you look through the world, right? So if you're a Bible believe or if you're a God believing person, right? If you believe in a higher deity, I'm a Bible believing person. That's my worldview, right? So that in my world, in your worldview tends to, you really want to answer the big questions, right? Origin, meaning, morality, destiny. I mean, those are like the four biggest questions that you have to answer. And so each worldview has to be able to answer those four questions, whatever worldview it is, right? And then, you have to figure out, okay, I answered those questions. Do they correspond to reality? And are they coherent? Do they make sense? I mean, obviously, I'm a Christian, so I think they all fit the bill, right? I mean, Christianity talks about origin, meaning, morality, destiny. And in my opinion, it corresponds to reality best, and it's coherent. So you take that worldview, and I think to me, so that worldview, right? Whether you're a naturalistic atheist, right, or secular humanist, whatever, that's how you're going to see the world. That's how you're going to see how to solve certain problems in the world, whether it's government, social, local, on the local level, state level, whatever. So I think to me, when you ask that question, to me, that is the ultimate. I wouldn't even want to say one of the most important, because then it makes other things important. I would say that is the only important thing you have to ask is, what worldview are we coming from? Because that's how we're going to treat our fellow man, right? Through that worldview. So obviously, to me, when you get into, should we look at the world from a secular point of view, or the social issues from a secular point of view versus uh, 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 a God point of view or a theistic point of view? To me, yeah, would be better off looking at it from a Christian perspective, because the Christian perspective asks us to love our fellow man like like we love ourselves, or God has loved us, right? So to me, that is, and obviously when we start talking about love, right, this is where it gets really, really hairy and dirty and muddied and all this kind of stuff. Because what my kids think the way I should love them is to give them a whole bunch of money and tell them yes to everything, right? But I know better, and I'm like, well, no, that's not how I'm going to love you. We're all parents here, so you understand their meaning of love is way different than our meaning of love, and that's based on our experience, our wisdom, our knowledge, blah 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 blah. But yeah, to me, it is the ultimate question: is there a God? Is there no God? And how do we see the world through that lens? And obviously, to me, it's better to see that through a lens of there is a God, because then we put people, humans, whether they agree with us or not agree with us, we put them at the top. Because why? Because they are made in God's image. There's a hierarchy there. So yeah, if that makes sense. I mean, we can get into more of it, but that's kind of my overview of it.
Will?
Uh, my brother Sam, I'm going to have to disagree with you. The
Darn.
Matt, podcast stuff right here. Yeah, Mac, your question was about the course of America and folding it. Like, what's the best solution? It is not Christianity. The founding fathers went out of their way to make this a secular nation. This is another myth, another fallacy that is permeates out there, and this one actually pisses me off. That you ask people off the street, they're going to say, "Yeah, America is a Christian nation," and it absolutely is not. The founding fathers back in the 1780s, they knew they were students of history, they were students of science, and they saw from history that if you mix religion and politics, or religion and government, that is the opposite of unifying. And that has been proven over and over and over and over and over again. And there was no America, so this is all European history. Where they came from. The streets ran with rivers of blood, often and repeatedly, with that combination of government and religion. So they went out of their way to make this a secular nation, and there's a lot of thoughts going on in my head. If they were God-fearing men, if they really wanted this to be a Christian nation, it would have been plastered all over the Constitution. God this, Jesus that. But what you notice, if you really get into it, is the lack of mention of God, of Jesus. They knew the danger of mixing government and religion. So the American Constitution was actually the first to separate state and church. It was a first in the world. It was a uniquely American invention, and that's why they call it. One of the reasons they called it an American experiment is that separation. And again, they went through great pains to do that, and they would be rolling over in their grave with the efforts of people to try to smash that wall between church and state. And Christian nationalism is actually one of the biggest dangers to democracy now. So I'm not going to sit here and predict the future, but if they had it their way, they being the Christian nationalists, they're trying to codify their version of Christianity into law to make this a Christian nation. And it's not all Christians. It's going to be their brand of Christian. And whoever is not in that particular sect of Christianity that they agree with is going to be oppressed. All right. Just think what they will do to LGBTQ people, people of other religions, not Christians. The list goes on and on. I'm not going to say it's going to be all 100% dystopian, but if given full reins of this country, we wouldn't be able to do this podcast. I mean, it would be an extreme danger to democracy. So the solution lies in secularism, right? We have to, that wall between state and church has to be there, and it has to be strong. It has to be understood by our citizens. That last part is the hardest part, because to reverse these myths out there, it's going to take a generation. But as far as I'm concerned, that's the way to go as far as creating unity in this country, creating any semblance of peace. And we can still get, I get what you're saying, Sam. It's like Jesus teaches to love everyone. It's not, I don't think it's quite that inclusive. Even Jesus's teachings only related to people that follow Jesus, and everyone else, I think there was a description of dogs, or why waste miracles on dogs. I mean, it's written, I forget where it is in the Bible, but it's not as inclusive as people think. And in a country such as ours, where there are multiple ethnicities and religions or sexual orientations, it's a mishmash. We need to have secularism binding us together. It cannot be religion. Religion is the opposite of unity, and that's my take.
Right.
Awesome.
So, well, I don't know if you need to move on or you stay on that.
Well, if you want to say something, I was going to move on. But
Right. So, I knew I had a feel. I knew the wall, the separation between church and state. I think that's really been
overstated.
well. It's actually it's misguided, because a lot of people think it's the government was trying to remove church out of the public. Actually, that when it was written by Jefferson, if you really go back and look at the actual documents, it was actually the purpose of the separation was always to protect the church from the interference by government. It wasn't government trying to take the Christianity or religion out of the public. It was actually protecting the church from government interference. And so the one thing that, when it happened, and I think it was in the courts, like in that late 1800s, and when the Supreme Court said, well, okay, that's true, but the only time that the government can interfere was, and they had certain couple of stipulations. I think I was looking it up. It was like incest, child sacrifice, infanticide, and what. So when those happened, yes, the government can interfere with the church, and I think that was the only. I don't want to say loophole, but that was the only time that they could do that. But the whole thing with Jefferson saying the wall of separation between church and state was actually to protect the church from the government, not the other way around.
So I have a different take on that. I agree that it gets overstated and understated depending on who's talking, right? If it's a secular person, they highlight the separation of church and state, even though that is more of a colloquialism than an edict. And then on the other side, they highlight how Christian we are. And Sam just kind of highlighted a possible theory of why there was separation of church and state. And I think they get overstated and understated depending on what perspective you have. My thought is that I think they were absolutely committed to not having tyranny. And one part of the tyranny of the English government was the emphasis of the church and how much power the church held over the government. And in order to avoid that tyranny, they were smart enough to explicitly allow freedom of religious expression, but to highlight the fact that they did not want the church to have control over government versus the other way around. Now, those are both opinions. That's my thoughts, and I have heard your take on it before, and I just kind of wanted to throw that out there. I'm not saying you're incorrect. I'm not saying I'm correct. I'm just saying that that's kind of a different take on it. And I find that depending on whoever you talk to, the separation of church and state gets tossed around just based on what you're trying to accomplish. I'm not saying that happened with you guys. I'm just saying in general.
Right. And, and I think, we look at that, and I know that gets brought up a lot, we could definitely bring up like what was done in the name of religion. We could also bring up what was done in the name of, communism, secularism, all this stuff. I guess my point in saying all of this is I know. So I'm not going to sit here and negate what has happened, in the past with religion and bloodshed and all this kind of stuff. But if you really look at it, you could look at that and say, okay, that's true, but it's inconsistent with what Christ Jesus has taught, right? So yes, it's happened, and yes, we know it's bad, but it's inconsistent. On the other hand, when you have, communism killing hundreds of millions of people, right, in the 20th century, it's like, well, you can't say that's not consistent, because there is no that standard, whichever that standard is, because if these guys think, well, okay, these guys are no good, then there's no good. That's their humanist. That is their way of thinking of like, hey, you know what? Let's make the perfect human race, or this or that or the other, or these guys are no good, or whatever the case, right? So I guess I go back to, are you living consistently in what you believe? And so as soon as I say that, then you're like, then we could easily say, well, Christians are hypocrites. I'd be the first one to tell you 100% of Christians are hypocrites, 100% of them, right? I would also go further and say 100% of people are also hypocrites, because we all have standards. And guess what? You've never held that standard to 100%.